Let me take you to a world where maps are guesses, where news travels at the speed of horse hooves, and where a single decision can tilt the fate of empires. You and I are standing at the edge of one of history's most audacious military gambles. Hannibal Barca, leading an army from Iberia across rivers and hostile tribes, up into the Alps as winter closes in, and down into Italy itself. Rome thinks the war will be fought at sea, or in Spain, or maybe in Africa. Hannibal thinks differently. He is going to hit Rome where it least expects, through the roof of the world. When people say Hannibal crossed the Alps, it sounds like a line in a textbook. But if you were there, if you walked behind those elephants and stumbled on those frozen switchbacks, you would understand it as a long, grinding chain of decisions. What to carry, who to trust, when to fight, when to negotiate, when to burn a village to keep your rear safe, and when to keep moving even if your feet are bleeding through the leather. And if you were there with me, you'd see it the way I saw it. Not as a single heroic moment, but as a moving city of men and animals, struggling through geography that does not care about courage. You'd smell the smoke of cooking fires trapped in cold air. You'd hear the scrape of iron on rock. You'd watch a line of soldiers vanish into fog and reappear hours later on a ridge like ants on a knife edge. And you'd feel the most important truth of all. Hannibal did not conquer the Alps. He survived them, and that survival became a weapon. Before we begin, a quick note for you watching on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this series continue. And if you want more documentary-style historical stories like this one, we need your support to keep making them. Now, breathe in. Imagine cold air in your lungs. Imagine the distant bellows of elephants. Imagine the Roman Republic, confident and unready. And come with me. Chapter 1. Iberia, the mustering of a storm. If you had met Hannibal in Iberia, you might not have noticed him at first, not because he was unimpressive, he wasn't, but because the true power around him was motion. Everything moved. Men were counted, reassigned, fed, marched, and drilled. Horses were shod. Pack mules were loaded and unloaded. Spears were checked. Sling stones sorted. Leather oiled. It felt less like an army and more like a machine that had to be kept alive every day. We start near the Carthaginian base in southern Iberia, a region the Carthaginians had turned into a military economy. Silver and taxes flowed out. Soldiers and supplies flowed in. The landscape is dry in places, green in river valleys, and always shaped by distance. Towns sit like islands in a sea of hills. Roads exist, but they're not Roman roads. More like stubborn paths worn by trade and war. Hannibal's army is not one people, it's a layered mix. Libyans hardened by discipline, Iberian infantry with their own fierce pride, Balearic slingers whose stones can break bone at terrifying range, and Numidian cavalry, light, fast, almost untouchable. Men who ride like they grew from the saddle. And then, the elephants. Not the huge Indian elephants you might imagine from later eras, but smaller North African elephants, still immense up close. When one shifts its weight, the ground seems to answer. The first thing you'd learn is that logistics is the real commander. Hannibal can win battles, yes, but first he must move. Feeding tens of thousands of mouths means the army becomes a traveling appetite. Grain is measured like treasure. Foraging parties spread outward like fingers. Local tribes watch from the hills, calculating whether to trade, submit, or ambush. You and I would see the politics. in every mile. Iberian tribes have their own loyalties and grudges. Some fight for Carthage because Rome is far away, others because their rival tribe is closer. Hannibal's genius includes something less romantic than tactics. He understands that fear and reward are currencies. He negotiates, he threatens, he adopts local allies, and when necessary, he uses violence as a message to the next town on the road. The march north is its own campaign. The Ebro River, broad, cold in places, and stubborn, marks a threshold. Crossing it isn't just a physical act, it's a declaration that the war is leaving Iberia behind and moving toward Rome's sphere. Every river after that is a question. Do we build bridges, find fords, or force a crossing under threat? Then come the Pyrenees, a different kind of barrier than the Alps, but still a test. Forested slopes, sudden passes, narrow valleys, where a small force can harass a larger one for days. You'd feel the atmosphere change as you gain elevation. Nights sharpen. The army stretches into a long ribbon. And in that ribbon, weakness shows. Some allied contingents, especially those who joined for opportunity rather than loyalty, begin to slip away. Desertion in ancient armies isn't just cowardice, it's a calculation. Why die for a distant general? Men ask themselves when the road begins to look like it will never end. Hannibal responds the way he often does, by focusing the core. He releases some troops to hold territory behind him. He keeps the fighters he trusts most. He doesn't need the biggest army on paper. He needs an army that will follow him into places men tell stories about and avoid. As we descend from the Pyrenees into Gaul, the world opens. Rivers widen, the air gets wetter. Forests thicken. The people are different. Tribes that Rome calls barbarians, but that word hides complexity. Some villages are wealthy in cattle and grain. Some are warlike, proud, and easily offended. Politics here moves through chiefs, oaths, hostages, and gifts. And here's the first moment I want you to feel personally. Imagine you're walking near the middle of the column. You're not an officer. You're close enough to hear language mixing like a crowded market. Punic, Iberian dialects, Greek from a merchant, Libyan voices, the clipped commands of a veteran. You realize that the army is a fragile agreement. It is held together by pay, by charisma, by fear of what happens if you're left behind, and by the strange momentum of shared hardship. Then the rumor spreads through the marching line like a spark in dry grass. Rome is moving. Roman forces are mobilizing. Roman allies in northern Italy are uneasy. The war is no longer a plan. It's a living creature. And Hannibal, at the front, is feeding it. Chapter 2. The Rhône, where water tries to stop history. When we reach the Rhône River, you understand why rivers have always been natural borders. The Rhône is not a gentle ribbon. It's wide, fast, and cold, moving with the confidence of something that has been here long before empires. On one bank, Hannibal's army gathers like a storm cloud. On the other, hostile tribes assemble to contest the crossing. And somewhere to the east or south, never exactly where you want them, Roman scouts and forces are moving, trying to locate Hannibal before he vanishes into terrain where the Roman way of war loses its advantages. This is where you'd see Hannibal's mind at work, not in speeches, but in practical decisions. He cannot afford to spend weeks building a perfect bridge. He cannot afford to fight a bloody battle just to stand still. He needs to cross fast with minimal loss and keep moving before the Romans pin him. So the army becomes carpenters. Trees fall, Logs are cut and bound. Boats are acquired from locals. Barges from traders. Anything that floats becomes valuable. You'd hear axes all day. You'd smell sap. You'd watch men test knots the way a sailor tests a lifeline. The tribe on the far bank, picture them on a rise, shouting, showing weapons, daring the crossing, thinks the river is enough of a wall. They expect the first Carthaginians to step into the water and die. But Hannibal doesn't just push forward, he thinks sideways. A detachment is sent upstream, quietly, to find a place to cross where the enemy doesn't expect. Imagine you are with them, moving through reeds and trees, trying not to splash, trying not to be seen. The river here is still dangerous, but at least the far bank is less guarded. They build makeshift rafts or use boats, and when they finally cross, they do not announce themselves. They wait. Then, at the main crossing point, Hannibal orders the crossing to begin. The first men step onto boats, and the river immediately begins to decide who lives. Water slams into hulls. Men grip the sides until their knuckles go white. Horses panic, eyes rolling, hooves scraping wood. You'd hear screaming, not from bravery or fear, but from the simple shock of cold water and the terror of drowning in armor. As the first waves reach the far bank, the tribe attacks exactly as expected. Spears fly. Stones hit shields with a hard, flat crack. Men stumble on slick mud. It is chaotic and brutal, a fight not for glory, but for footing. And then, the perfect timing, smoke rises behind the tribe. Shouts change tone. They realize they're being attacked from their rear by Hannibal's hidden detachment. This isn't just a tactical move, it's psychological warfare. In tribal fighting, the fear of being surrounded can break courage faster than casualties. The defenders falter. The river crossing accelerates. More boats, more men, a steady flood of Carthaginian troops onto the far bank. Within hours, what looked impossible becomes inevitable. Now we reach the part everyone asks about, the elephants. How do you move a creature that weighs several tons across a violent river? You would see ingenuity, fear, and stubbornness all at once. Some elephants are guided onto reinforced rafts, large platforms stabilized by smaller boats. The handlers speak to them, touch them, calm them. The elephants hesitate, feeling the unnatural shift of floating wood beneath their feet. Some refuse. Some step on and then sway, trunks raised, ears flared, the river roaring beneath them. In some accounts, elephants are coaxed to swim, guided by rafts, but even if they swim, the current can carry them downstream like drifting boulders. The sight is unforgettable. A massive head above water, trunk like a snorkel, eyes wide, struggling not with enemy blades but with nature. This is where you would feel something that textbooks don't capture, the army's dependence on morale. If the elephants panic and drown, men will read it as an omen. If the crossing succeeds, men will read it as destiny. Hannibal knows this. He watches. He intervenes where he can. He makes sure the story of success spreads faster than the whispers of loss. After the crossing, the pace sharpens. Hannibal wants distance between himself and Roman forces. The land here is a mix of plains and foothills, and the tribes shift from hostility to negotiation depending on who seems stronger at the moment. Messengers come and go. Hostages may be exchanged. Food is acquired by trade in one village, by force in another. And above all, there's a growing presence on the horizon, the Alps. At first, they look like distant clouds that refuse to move. Then they become a wall. Then they become a world. If you were with me at the campfires in those days, you'd hear the army's conversations change. Men stop talking about Rome as an abstract enemy and start talking about the mountains. Veterans tell stories, narrow paths, sudden snow, tribes that attack and vanish, cliffs that swallow whole columns. Some laugh to hide fear. Some sharpen their blades as if steel can cut cold. Hannibal, meanwhile, gathers intelligence like a hunter. Local guides are bribed or threatened. He asks about passes, about winter conditions, about who controls which valleys. He also knows that guides can lie. A guide can lead you into an ambush as easily as into a pass. So Hannibal watches faces, watches hesitations, watches the way men point when they speak of danger. This is the chapter where the war shifts in your mind. You realize that the next enemy is not Rome's legions. It is geography itself. Chapter 3. The Alps, where the earth turns against you. The first steps into the Alps feel like entering a different planet. The air changes. Sound travels differently, sharper, more brittle. Valleys narrow as if the mountains are closing around you. The sun appears and disappears behind ridges, and when it disappears, the cold arrives like a physical thing. You'd think the hardest part is climbing. It isn't. The hardest part is that climbing never ends when you want it to. It ends when the mountain decides. The army becomes a long, strained organism. Up front, scouts and light troops probe the path. Behind them, infantry climbs in blocks, trying to keep formation on terrain that mocks formation. Pack animals struggle, hooves slipping on stone. Wagons, if any have survived this far, become liabilities. And always the risk of attack. Mountain tribes know every ledge and choke point. They don't need to defeat Hannibal in open battle. They only need to cause a panic at the wrong spot. Imagine a narrow path along a cliff, just wide enough for 2 men. Now imagine a sudden shower of rocks from above. One mule falls. It crashes into the man behind it. The line stops. Men bunch up. Someone slips. A scream drops away into the void. And in that moment of confusion, raiders rush in, stabbing and retreating before the heavier troops can respond. Hannibal counters with discipline and intimidation. He places strong troops on vulnerable flanks where possible. He orders night camps on defensible ground. He uses scouts constantly. But discipline has limits. Cold erodes patience. Hunger erodes courage. And the mountains offer endless places for fear to breed. There is also the problem of altitude. Men who have never lived in high country breathe harder. Sleep becomes shallow. Small wounds become dangerous because everything heals slower when your body is fighting the environment. Now picture the elephants. Every step of an elephant is a commitment. On a narrow track, an elephant cannot simply turn around. If the path collapses, it collapses for everyone. The handlers become heroes and villains depending on whether the elephant obeys. You'd watch them speak softly, then shout, then use pressure and tools, doing everything to keep these living siege engines moving. And then the weather turns. Snow is not just snow up here, it is a concealment. It hides ice beneath it. A path that looks solid becomes a trap. Men step and their feet slide out from under them. Pack animals go down like toppled statues. When an animal falls on a slope, it can pull others with it, and suddenly the mountain is collecting bodies. At some point, you reach a place where the route is blocked, whether by a landslide, a collapsed ledge, or something the locals destroyed to stop you. This is where the crossing becomes not just a march, but an engineering project under threat. You'd see soldiers with picks and shovels cutting into rock and frozen earth. You'd see them build retaining walls from stone, stacking rocks in a desperate attempt to widen a path. You'd hear officers shouting counts. How many men can pass per minute? How many animals? How long until night? There is a famous story, often repeated, about Hannibal using fire and vinegar to crack rock. Whether that specific detail is true or exaggerated, the underlying reality is true. They had to break stone, clear rubble, and create a passable route where one did not exist for an army. Fire can heat rock, and rapid cooling can fracture it. Ancient armies did use fire in engineering. The point is not the vinegar. The point is the time, the labor, and the danger of doing this while your supplies shrink and winter tightens its grip. And then one day, you crest a high point and the view opens. This is the moment artists love. But if you were there, you might not feel triumphant. You might feel exhausted. From a high ridge, you can see down into the lands that lead toward Italy, valleys unfolding like a map. Hannibal is said to have pointed out the direction of the Po Plain to his men, promising them reward and relief. If you're standing there with me, you feel the power of that gesture. It's not just motivation, it's orientation. It turns chaos into a narrative. We suffer now to live later. But the descent is cruel. Going down is often worse than going up. Your legs shake, your balance fails when you least expect it. Ice on a downward slope is a killer. Men fall forward and slide. Loads shift. Animals tumble. If you're unlucky, you're not just injured, you're lost, carried away into ravines and buried by snow. You'd also see something grim and quietly historical: attrition. Not the dramatic death of battle, but the steady subtraction of an army by cold, hunger, disease, accidents, and ambushes. A man who marched out of Iberia strong can become a shivering shadow here, and then a body by morning. At night, the camps are worlds of their own. Fires are precious, but wood is scarce at altitude. Men huddle close. They dry what little they can. They speak less. The animals steam in the cold. The elephants stand like moving hills, their breath rising in clouds. If you ask me what it felt like emotionally, I tell you this: the Alps compress time. A day can feel like a week. A mile can feel like a campaign. And yet the column keeps moving because stopping is death. By the time the army finally breaks out of the high mountains and reaches lower ground, you can measure survival in faces. Some are swollen from cold. Some have cracked lips and hollow eyes. Armor is dulled. Shoes are ruined. But there is also something else: hardened confidence. They have done what most thought impossible. And Rome still doesn't fully understand what is about to step into Italy. Chapter 4. Italy, the first blood and the shadow of Rome. The first breath of lower air feels like a gift. The landscape changes quickly. Fewer sheer cliffs, more valleys with trees, then broader plains. Water runs differently here, less violent, more agricultural. You begin to smell soil again instead of stone. But the relief is brief, because Italy is not empty. Northern Italy is a mosaic of peoples and loyalties. Some Celtic tribes resent Rome and might welcome Hannibal as a liberator. Others fear what any invading army brings: requisition, violence, upheaval. Hannibal's army emerges battered, but still dangerous. Think about that. An army that has just been chewed by the Alps and is still capable of offensive operations. That alone tells you something about Hannibal's leadership and the quality of his core troops. Now the war becomes human again, not just environmental. Scouts report Roman movements. Roman cavalry tests the edges of Hannibal's forces. The first clashes are not giant set-piece battles yet. They are probes, ambushes, skirmishes that feel like the opening taps before a storm. You would notice Hannibal's cavalry immediately. The Numidians are not heavy knights. They are mobility and harassment made flesh. They throw javelins, retreat, return, never letting the enemy settle. Hannibal uses this like a surgeon uses a scalpel, to cut nerves, to confuse, to draw Roman forces into ground of Hannibal's choosing. One of the early major confrontations is near the Ticino River, where cavalry plays a central role. If you were there, you would see how Roman confidence can be punished. Roman cavalry, typically less flexible than Hannibal's mixed horsemen, finds itself pressured and outmaneuvered. Hannibal's forces, Numidians on the flanks, heavier cavalry where it matters, turn a clash into a lesson. The psychological impact matters. Northern Italian tribes watch these fights like investors watching a market. Who looks strong? Who looks like the future? Every Roman setback makes alliance with Hannibal seem less suicidal. Then comes the Trebia, and here the war takes the shape that will define Hannibal's Italian campaign. He wins not by matching Rome's strength, but by making Rome fight under the wrong conditions. The Trebia region is cold in winter with damp air and icy water. Hannibal understands suffering because he just walked through it. He uses weather as a weapon. Roman troops, pressured to engage, cross cold water and arrive on the battlefield already compromised. Numb limbs, stiff fingers, weakened stamina. Hannibal's troops, better prepared, fed, and positioned, are ready. You would see infantry lines collide in the ancient style. Shield against shield, pushing, stabbing, slipping in mud-stained dark. You'd hear the dull percussion of thousands of impacts, the shouted commands that vanish in noise, the sudden terror when a flank collapses and men realize they're about to be surrounded, and then the ambush. Hannibal often uses hidden forces, troops concealed in reeds or low ground, to strike at the right moment. The feeling when an empty patch of land erupts with armed men is pure panic. Formation breaks. Confidence becomes escape instinct. This is the moment the Alps pay off. Hannibal didn't cross to prove a point. He crossed to bring Rome into a war it did not prepare for. Rome expected to fight Hannibal on predictable fronts. Instead, Hannibal is now inside Italy, forcing Roman armies to respond, forcing Roman politics into emergency decisions, forcing Rome's allies to ask whether Rome can protect them, and you, standing with me after those first major clashes, would understand the most chilling detail. Hannibal is not done. The Alps were the door. Italy is the hallway. Now, look around the camp after victory. It's not triumphant in the way you might imagine. It's practical. The wounded are tended. Captured supplies are sorted. Horses are fed first because without cavalry, Hannibal loses a key advantage. Prisoners are interrogated and sometimes released deliberately to spread fear or to encourage defections. Hannibal's diplomacy continues even in war. He wants Italian allies, not just Italian corpses. As for the elephants, by now many are gone. Cold, injuries, and the sheer stress of the crossing take a toll. The survivors are still symbols, still shock weapons, but the campaign's true heart is Hannibal's ability to manipulate terrain, timing, and psychology. If you ask me what I remember most vividly from this final stage of the crossing, I wouldn't say the elephants or the battles. I would say this: the moment Italy realizes the mountains did not protect it. The moment Roman citizens, hearing rumors, understand that an enemy commander has done something the Roman mind considered irrational. And in war, the irrational is terrifying, because it means your opponent is not bound by your expectations. Hannibal stands on Italian soil with an army that should not exist anymore, and yet it does. And Rome, the great machine of legions and law, must now improvise. That is what the Alpine crossing truly achieved. Epilogue. What it means to have been there. So, if you and I had witnessed Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, we wouldn't remember it as a clean legend. We'd remember it as hunger, cold, negotiation, betrayal, engineering, blood, and stubborn movement forward. We'd remember the Rhône churning under overloaded rafts. We'd remember the crunch of snow under exhausted feet. We'd remember the fear of a narrow path and the sudden violence of a mountain ambush. And we'd remember the eerie, almost unreal feeling of stepping into Italy and knowing the world had just shifted. History often flatters great events into simple lines, but being there would teach you the truth. Empires are not only challenged by armies, they are challenged by imagination, the willingness to do what seems impossible and to pay the cost. If you enjoyed this documentary-style story and you want more chapters like this, more ancient campaigns, more first-person historical immersion, subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps the series continue, and your support is what turns these stories into a regular upload. And if you want, next time we can go deeper into the Italian campaign itself. How Hannibal used rivers, fog, and psychology to defeat larger Roman forces, and how Rome adapted into something even more relentless. Until then, stay curious